Good evening, everyone, and welcome once again. My name is Andrea, and I work on the marketing team here at the Strand bookstore. We're really happy to have everyone here tonight. Before we launch into the discussion, I wanted to share a little bit with you about the Strand. The Strand was founded in 1927 by Benjamin Bass on 4th Avenue's Book Row. Stretching from Union Square to Astor Place, Book Row gradually dwindled from 48 bookstores until after 93 years, the Strand is the sole survivor, now run by third-generation owner Nancy Bass Wyden. We wanted to take a moment just to thank you for all of your support, because we know without the loyal support of our book lovers out there, we wouldn't be where we are today. Tonight, we're excited to have with us John Fram, who is celebrating the release of his book, The Brightest Lands. A little bit about the book too, which I'm so excited about. The town of Bentley, Texas holds two things dear: its football and its secrets. Friday nights are sacred. The people of Bentley gather in devotion to the vigor of their boys playing under those famous halogen lamps. Go Bison, my herd, my glory. The lifeblood of this place is the cold crack of a tackle, the exultation of a first down, the ecstasy of a two-point conversion, and the sheer bliss of a win. But when their all-star quarterback, Dylan Whitley, the boy with the $1 million arm, goes missing, an unwelcome but familiar gloom returns to Texas. For he is not the first Bison boy to disappear. Gossip spreads like wildfire. Accusations as to how and where and why Dylan vanished grow violent. Monsters lurk beneath the ground. With Officer Clark on the case, aided by Dylan's hotshot brother Joel, recently arrived from New York carrying secrets of his own, new clues reveal themselves at every turn. Fresh evidence is uncovered by the hour, whispers from the dark beckon. A town is buried in shame once again. And just what, or where, or who are the Bright Lands? John Fram was raised in Texas. A resident of New York, he has written for The Atlantic, Pacific Standard, and elsewhere. This is his first novel. Joining John tonight is Adam Eli. Adam is a community organizer and author based in New York City. His first book, The New Queer Consciousness, was published in June of this year by Penguin Teen. He is the founder of the international activist group Voices For and the editor-in-chief of a zine about global gender equality produced by Gucci and Chime for Change. He was named one of the 100 most influential queer people in the world by Out magazine and firmly believes that queer people everywhere are responsible for queer people everywhere. Without further ado, John Fram and Adam Eli.
Hey.
Oh my God. Hi.
Hello. Oh my God. It's good. We're here.
Congratulations.
Oh my God. Thank you.
So exciting. It's the eve of the launch of your debut novel. So my first question is, how do you feel?
How do I feel? Good. I mean, honestly, it's weird launching anything in a pandemic. And I think especially, a debut novel, you don't realize until you're in the publishing machine how much work goes into publishing the debut novel. So much of my heart right now is just so grateful for all the editors and the publicists and the social media people and everybody who has just thrown their back into supporting this book. And it makes me just so grateful. So I'm mostly just happy right now. This is a really fun feeling.
I'm so glad. Of course, we have to give a special shout out to our agent, our mutual agent, Ross.
Hi, yes, Ross Harris. What's up, babe?
So I want to dive in right away because I have some questions that I thought of. So the first thing is, I think we both feel it's important to acknowledge the unique moment that we're in and the importance of the Black Lives Matter movement. I know you and I went to a protest together. And so right off the bat, in this book, which you obviously did not write this month, racism and, racism and also the inequality within our justice system plays a big role within the plot really quickly. There's a character who is openly racist and a character running from them at the beginning. So could you just talk a little bit about why you put that so up front and center here?
I think so much of the book to me was about rot. It's about the way that secrets and hatred and shame sort of rot people from the inside out. And it really it just really affected me to the more I thought about it, the more I was like, well, it's a book about homophobia. It's a book about racism. It's a book about the fear of small town America toward like the rest of the world and toward diverse people. And it does feel very, very strange that it feels very timely right now, that this book with, you know, one of the first major subplots is this very overt racism. And then that bleeds into all these other forms of prejudice and violence. But it's strange to, I think really what it is, if anything, is it's just sort of sad to realize that this is so perennially happening. Like this danger is always going to, I don't want to say it's always going to be here, but it's been here for the last 2 years. You know, I wrote this book 2 years ago, and it's still very present, because I think when you get down to it, all of these forms of like hatred and fear are very baked together. Not to minimize one or the other, but the homophobia and the racism and the misogyny in the book are all part of the same piece of, you know, people who have power or don't want to give up any power. And it's pretty terrible.
Absolutely. I think that makes total sense. And I also think that it really comes through in the book. And you touched on the next thing I want to talk about, which is, in my humble opinion, I feel like the characters in this book that have like real guts and, you know, like real grace and also guts are the women. Like there are, or female identifying, the female characters in this book. They seem to be, like in all great stories, the ones really pushing forward, the ones with integrity. And so this is like these strong women and these sort of like kind of shady guys sometimes. Like where did that intentional? Where did that come from?
I mean, that just came from growing up in Texas, honestly. Like I like all of the real ballers who got me through like my life growing up in Texas were women. Like men for sure. And like I'm very blessed to have some really great people to look up to. Like I have a really great father. I have really cool people, like really cool men in my life. But the women who I went to school with, like my teachers, and then when I got older, you know, I didn't really have the money to go to college or anything, so I pretty much jumped right into working like shitty retail jobs to survive for a really long time. And you know, I worked with so many women who had been doing that from the jump, and it was just like they were so tough, and they taught me so much about hard work and also not lying to yourself and not lying to other people, and sort of they just had like, you know, bullshit detectors like no other. And I always wanted to write women like that. So yeah, they were honestly like the most fun, honestly the easiest part of the book to write, because the fun thing about a mystery is setting up all these like questions and then just having like a tough woman come in and start kicking things over is really great.
Oh, that's so great. And I also worked retail, so that I think that's such, I love that answer. So
you know that life. Yes.
The next thing I want to talk about, and this, okay, so something I was telling John is, your book is kind of hard to talk about in a setting like this, because this is officially a no spoiler space.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's very hard to talk about the book, but without ruining anything. So I just want everyone here to know that nothing will be revealed that shouldn't be. And so one of the things I wanted to ask, yes, no spoilers. At the very, very, very beginning, you set up this character, Joel, who's gay in the city. He's jaded, he's drugged out, he's sexed out. He like came for the gay American dream and got it.
Yes.
And you'll see how that transpires. But this character, I'm curious to know, where did this come from? Because like I know many a Joel.
Yeah.
You know?
I think, so it came from a couple of places. I mean, part of it was, a lot of this book did come from a lot of anger that I felt because I wrote this book in like 2017. And by that point, like, you know, I was really disappointed in the queer community in a lot of ways, truth be told, because I was like, we had sort of lost our militaristic edge. We got the ability to get married, and all of a sudden it just felt like so many of the privileged white gays just sort of like pieced out. And, you know, trans, gay, like people of color, trans people, they were just struggling so hard to like get anywhere. And then we got a fascist president. And I was like, I couldn't shake the feeling that part of the blame, like a lot of people are to blame for our current nightmare, but I was like, part of the blame is like, we stopped for a while being a militant, angry group. You know what I'm saying? Like we as queer people stopped being, and not to say there aren't tons of people who were doing activism, there were, but I had that momentum that had built up for about 15 or 10 years building up to gay marriage just seemed to have all evaporated. And I was very angry at that because I was like, it felt like there was this whole class of privileged white gay men, especially once I moved to the city and started sleeping with them, who were like, they had theirs and they were done. And, you know, for me, I was just always like, that must be very unsatisfying. And then also, like, you know, you go out to the Pines, you go to some rooftop party in like Brooklyn or Hell's Kitchen, and you would meet all these guys who are beautiful and they all are sort of cultivated and they all look the same and they're all rolling in money. And every now and then they would like say something and like reveal this much more complicated inner life than anybody quite is ready to deal with. And not always like a damaged inner life, just like something really interesting and nuanced that then was immediately suppressed. Like I would feel like I'd be at these parties and I would always like get very bored after a while because it's like, how often can you talk about Rain on Me? You know what I mean? Like it's a struggle. So I was like, what would happen if I could center a book around one of these men who really fascinated me? Because, you know, as annoying as like the bougie white gays can be, there's something really beautiful there of like, there is a human inside this like really hot Equinox shell. And like, who is that guy? And so, you know, he became sort of emblematic to me as I went on of like queer people maybe having to, not to get too heavy-handed, but like he is a queer man who discovers his purpose and he discovers quite a lot of drive because when he gets to this town and there's all these secrets and there's all this shit that still hasn't been resolved, he starts fighting back in a way that I don't think he's ever really been prepared to fight back. And then he becomes, what my other goal with the book was to have a strong queer hero, and he becomes, you know, by the end of the book, he's very brave and he's really like, he goes through some hell, but he's a really tough person. So I think it was just like this slightly sadistic desire to see like a really hot man like get, you know, the screws put to him a little bit. But then there was this deeper desire to see like, could we get past queer fiction that depicted gay suffering and get into queer heroism?
Okay, first of all, I love that. Obviously, I love gay heroism. And I think I see Joel in a similar way. And in another way, I think of him as like, I think that through Joel, you provide like an avenue for empathy for all of us. Because, you know, like I've met Joel, I've seen him at parties, I've judged him for being shallow or not wanting to sleep with me, whatever. And here, like, I think behind a lot of Joel's are a lot of trauma. Because growing up queer in a straight world is not easy. And so in some ways, I think that ultimately you like created a lot of compassion around that like burnt out finance gay bro.
You know, that's very nice to hear because he was, I think the trauma is, it's one of those things where it's complicated to talk about it because on the one hand, I did want to move away from like trauma porn, which I think is definitely a genre of queer art. But I did also want to be honest about the fact that to me, what was interesting about Joel is the connection between like trauma and ambition, because you see that in a lot of queer men where it's like, you know, we're always striving and hustling to be like the biggest fish in a small pond. And it's a really tough life. But I think that Joel, yeah, I think that also just the thing I like about Joel and the thing I'm grateful with is like when you start a book, you don't really know where your characters are going to end up. And I'm very grateful that he turned out to have a spine in him. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. The next thing, I feel like this book is packed with, there are a lot of social issues in the book. And the next thing I want to talk about is the only time I've ever seen the opioid crisis really spoken about in literature, I guess, is in Ocean Vuong in On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. But talk about the opioid crisis here. And so I'm wondering, did that play a role in your childhood, or what made you think that was an important thing to incorporate here?
I mean, Texas is interesting poor Texas is interesting because it is all, the drugs are just everywhere. And it was also something where I was like, well, the substance abuse in gay men is very high. So it gave me actually something where, in a funny way, Joel could have something in common with this like Texas town that he doesn't give a shit about. It's interesting because he actually realizes he does, that he has a bit of a drug problem. I mean, for him, it's Adderall. And for these townies, you know, it's meth and oxycodone. But yeah, I mean, I saw it everywhere. There was like, I remember I worked at this grocery store back in the day in like small town Texas. And there was a bunch of dudes who would like stock the grocery shelves overnight, and they would always be on meth. Like they were always iced out. And it was crazy because there was one night a coworker's husband came in to like shop at like 3 a.m. and saw all these dudes, and my coworker and her husband had been like, they'd had their party days. Like they knew the signs. And they, because it was a small town, they knew the overnight manager, and they asked him like, hey, like, why are you, like, what's going on with these guys? These guys are clearly high. Like anybody with eyes can see that these guys are on meth. And the store manager was like, oh yeah, they all do that. But what's great is then when they hurt themselves, we don't have to pay them workers' comp because they always fail the drug test. And it made me realize that there's this entire system set up to punish poverty and to keep people poor. And it blew my mind. I mean, I was like 18 when I heard that, but then it stuck with me because then you do meet all these people who are on drugs, and you know, the irony for me was like, I didn't do drugs when I was in Texas. I did drugs when I moved to New York. And that was another really interesting contradiction, because I was like, well, in Texas, people in New York view Texas as like Hicksville and very like degenerate and drug addled and stuff. And what I was kind of curious with experimenting with Joel was like, you can fall into just as deep a hole, if not deeper, in the city. And again, this idea, it was just something where I was always trying to find ways to tether the city and the countryside, because they're so often segregated in fiction. And drugs was one of those things that they had very strongly in common.
Got it. Okay, cool. And so now I want to switch from the book a little bit to talk a little bit about writing the book and you. As you mentioned before, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you've had, like, there is a little bit of like an American dream kind of story. Like, young little gay boy from Texas, from like a small town in Texas, could not pay for college right off the bat, like you said, worked really hard and found himself eventually in a big fancy room in New York.
Yeah, it's crazy. I know.
And so I'm wondering if you could tell us, like, this is a question I actually asked you before on an Instagram live, where it's like, for everyone watching, I would say, like, fill in the blank. Like, in order to write a book, you need to what? And in order to write a book, you don't have to, like, you know what I mean?
This is, yeah. I'm trying to remember. I can't remember what I answered you, so this is going to be fun.
I remember one, so I'll, like, if you don't say it, then I'll say it back to you.
Okay. I think the one that I said that you have to do is you have to wake up early.
Yeah, that's what
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Because, like, you know, I figured out when I was in my early 20s, like, society, especially if you're poor, is built to keep you poor. And the only way that you're going to do anything with your life is if you start operating at the hours that society isn't running. And for me, that was early, like crack of dawn early, so that I could do my real work before my like crap work. So I would say like waking up early is like one of the only ways I know of to get yourself out of a situation, because it worked for me. Like I can't promise it'll work for everybody, but I definitely had to be waking up at like 5 every day for like years to get anywhere in my life. And then you do not need, I probably said a degree because that was, you don't need a degree. I think that there are people who do, especially certain types of writing do reward degrees, like literary writing reward degrees, and they also do reward MFA programs because you do network like no other at an MFA program, and that can be really useful if you're trying to write literary fiction, because for literary to work, you have to be like winning awards and connecting with people and like this really tight community. But if you want to write commercial fiction, I didn't do any kind of education for it. I just read a lot and watched a lot of movies.
I think that's so cool, and it's so important because it takes that barrier or those gates, and at least some of them it removes. And so I think it's so cool that you did that, and I'm so grateful that young gay boys from Texas have you as an example for that. And so my next question is, I'm asking about two moments. One, what was like the coolest moment of this whole process, and also what was like the weirdest, where you were like good or bad or medium, but when you were like, wow, like I never thought that would
be. Oh wow, this is fun. I mean, the coolest is definitely, Ross probably remembers this better than me. Our agent probably remembers this better, but there was definitely a moment where, you know, I had written the book in about a year, and then we had it on submission for about a month, which isn't unusual for a debut. But it was getting to the point where I was getting really nervous. And then we had a couple editors who wanted to talk, which was fun. And then Ross was like, okay, everybody's got to put in their bids on this Friday if they're going to put in bids. And, you know, it was nerve-wracking. Like, you wake up and you like, I was just in like such a haze because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what's going to happen. Are people going to come through with money? And, you know, it was the dream come true moment because I was like walking to the subway because I had to go to work, and, you know, our agent calls and he's like, are you sitting down? And I like went and literally like had to like sit on a fire hydrant because there was like nowhere to sit. I was like on the street, and I was like, okay, what's up? And he's like, there's an auction for your book. Yes. And that was the moment where,
can you explain a little what that means?
yeah, so an auction just means that multiple houses are putting in bids for your book, which then means that the price goes up precipitously because they're competing for you. Because typically what happens is, typically the way a book will sell, if you're lucky, you have either a preempt, which is when an editor puts in like an aggressive early bid to try to like secure your book and to lock you out of the confusion of an auction, or only one editor puts in a bid from your book and it goes to that editor. Either way, you're in crazy shape because you're publishing a book. But an auction is when multiple houses want it. And then those are sort of the situations that will change a writer's life, because it means that by the time the book is sold, people in the publishing house are enthusiastic about it. It paves a lot of groundwork that you don't always get. So that was definitely like the highlight. And like, honestly, this whole process, now that like, once I got like the hardcover and like saw the actual book, that was really exciting. And, you know, once I see it in bookstores, it'll be cool. But that was definitely one of those, like, you don't get many moments like that in your life. You know, like these, like, are you sitting down phone calls are pretty cool. And then I'm sorry?
And then finding a fire hydrant.
And just like finding a fire hydrant to sit down.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just like hustling, trying to make it work. And
like
then, what's that?
Like a scene from a movie.
I know, exactly. And then weirdest, it's hard to say. I don't know. I mean, it's weird to sort of like post something and put it out there and talk about the book. And over the last like month or two, I've started to see, you know, like Instagram influencers, like big famous people comment on it or like it, or I'll like see them in my DMs, and like stuff like that's really cool. Like seeing, not that I'm particularly worked up about like famous chic life, like that's not really who I am per se, but to know that people who you admire will just like pop into your DMs and be like, hey, I got a copy through my manager, I think you're brilliant. Like that's pretty neat, but it's also very surreal because sometimes you're like, I have had times when like I get the little blue check and I have no idea who this person is, and I'm like, oh wow, thank you. I'm out here like scrambling on Google to try to figure out who they are before they like see my read receipt and get insulted I haven't replied. But you know, stuff like that.
Got it. And so this is the last question I'm going to ask you, and then we have 3 really good questions that are really strong asked already, and so we'll definitely encourage you to continue asking more. But the last thing I want to ask you before we go into those is, the internet plays a big role in both of our lives and a role in the way that we launched our books. And so I was wondering if you could talk to me a little bit about the world that is Bookstagram and your experience with that community.
You know, it's weird. That might be the weirdest thing. Like, you know, so if people like don't know what it takes to like launch a book, you have a publicity team. You know, you have people who are excited about your project and they're sending it out to magazine editors and bloggers and like big people to try to make something happen. And over the last couple of years, you know, book influencers on Instagram have become a real thing. And they do some amazing content. They just do beautiful pictures of like books and succulents or books and coffee. And they're really, the great ones like know their brand, they know their audience, and they have super high engagement. So publishers are always trying to get them to talk about their books. And, you know, for me, it was just something where, you know, part of it was I was really impatient. It takes a lot of, like, it takes a long time for books to sort of trickle into the consciousness. So back in January, I was just getting super angsty and I was like, oh my God, nobody's talking about my book. So I just like, and then by pure luck, one of the bigger Bookstagrammers, Scared Straight Reads, is his profile, he's Dennis, he's great. He posted like a rave review of the Brightlands. He had gotten like one of the first galleys. And I connected with him and I was like, oh, okay, this isn't so terrifying. Like, these people are nice. These people are like human beings, even though they have like tens of thousands of followers. They're actually really chill and they just love books. And so then I just started this like sort of networking campaign, honestly, of like, I started following everybody and seeing who knew who and who commented on who, and like really digging through it, and made like a list, I think, of about 200 names of like bloggers I wanted to contact. And then just started reaching out to them. And sometimes it was easy. Sometimes they had heard of the book and they had either messaged me or like we were following each other. But a lot of times you're just like sliding into people's DMs and seeing what happens. So I was very, very, very fortunate that a lot of people early on got excited about the book. And my publisher is amazing. And even once COVID hit, they kept sending out early copies and galleys. And they were able to really keep pushing on Bookstagram at a time when a lot of PR kind of stalled, like especially like the first couple months of COVID. So I feel incredibly blessed and eternally grateful that they were able to continue pushing on that platform, because what it allowed now is this really cool experience of like being, just every day now, like I get one of these really cool posts and like reviews and people liking it, or some people not liking it, but that causes like a whole conversation because they're all super engaged with each other. And it's a really lovely experience. And I'm eternally grateful that they have been so generous to the book.
John, that is awesome. I think you're so cool. You're definitely like one of my first literary friends, and I'm just so excited to be here. And you have, as usual, a very engaged audience. So I want to dive into the questions here. Thomas asked you a good question that I think is kind of hard, but
okay.
I'm gonna go for it. So Thomas O'Donnell says, you talked about the way that you find you talk about the way that you find the integrity and complexity with an attractive white gay guy. Are there other characters whose interiority and complexity you struggled to reveal? Did you have any misgivings about putting a hot white gay guy at the center of your narrative, even as you make him complex? So I'm going to sign off so that way you can talk directly to your readers, but I'll be right here.
Okay. That is a very good question. Hi, Tom. Thank you for throwing this one at me. I think that what was challenging for this book was, I kind of wanted to do like an Orange is the New Black thing, where it's like a Trojan horse. Like you have this like hot gay man, but he becomes an avenue into, like you said, a lot of other stories. One of the main characters is a Black man. There's several women, like Adam mentioned. There's these people who I think are given less screen time in narratives. And so what I didn't have so much misgivings about Joel. If I had misgivings about anyone, it was actually the other major character, who is a sheriff's deputy named Starsha Clark. Because even back before, this was written 3 years ago now, but even still, I was very dubious about having cops at the center of a narrative, just because I think any queer man with a knowledge of history is very dubious of the police. And I didn't want to perpetuate the narrative of the cops saving the day, because I found that I still find that very problematic. I think you have to be very cautious with how you depict the police. So I had misgivings with, and then had a lot of fear depicting, anytime you depict a person of color, when you're white, like you have to tread very carefully and very respectfully and very, no, I don't want to say with fear, but with a really hard critical eye. And so that took a very long time. And it took a lot of reading of, Black voices and really digging into the world in which these characters live to actualize that. But as far as getting into Joel's head and centering him in this narrative, I had, I think, less trepidation maybe than I would have now. But at the time, I didn't find it so hard, especially because I knew once I kind of snuck readers in, I would be able to keep them there and maybe expose them to way more than they are used to.
Such a beautiful, that was beautiful. Okay, so there are two questions now that I'm going to combine because they sort of make sense together. The first is, do you mind sharing, are you okay with sharing what part of Texas you're from?
Yeah, I'm from Waco, Texas. which is, yeah, it's like this glorified interstate stop. It's great.
with some unique history of its own.
Yeah, no, to be fair, like, I think that growing up in Waco, now that I have some distance on it, I think it definitely influenced the Brightlands, because it is really interesting to grow up in this very tiny, tight-knit community that has sort of a shameful past, or a very touchy past. Like, you know, Waco had this terrible siege back in the 90s that still is affecting people. Like, people still know, you know, I knew several people who lost family in that siege. Like, the wounds of it are still very fresh. So I think that definitely made it easier to write a town like Bentley, which is creepy and has a lot of stuff it doesn't want to deal with.
Got it. Okay, and so on that note, Powers K is asking, what do you think the reception will be like in Waco? And are you nervous about that at all?
No. I mean, so my parents were nervous about it. God bless them. They were... but because early drafts of the book actually had, so Bentley is completely fictional, like the town of Bentley, Texas, that the book takes place in is completely fictional, but the like outlying towns I used for a while real names, because I was just kind of, part of it is I was too lazy to invent fake names, and part of it I was like kind of trying to place this fake town within a realistic context to prove that this is a real place. Thankfully, fiction doesn't really require that, so I changed it. But in the early drafts of the book, you had places, like real places, like situated around this really messed up town, and my parents were like very trepidatious about that, because they do still live in Waco, and they were, you know, not thrilled about the idea. But and they have friends in those towns, and they're just, you know, it's a really explosive book. A lot of really bad stuff is going on, so nobody. I think if I'm like cautious about anybody and in any town, there are several little tiny communities where I followed on Instagram their high school football teams, like the boys on their football teams. And a lot of those kids were actually really generous with their time. And they spoke to me like at length about their experience on these teams and in their towns. And none of them shared anything resembling, you know, the sort of violence or terrible behavior that occurs in the book. But I very deliberately, like, I actually unfollowed all of them because I don't want anyone to know who I spoke with. Like, I don't want anyone who reads the book and like it touches a nerve in a bad way. I don't want them to find these kids and feel guilt by association is a real thing where I come from. And I don't want those kids to maybe suffer because of the kindness that they offered me. So I hope and pray that if anybody in their town reads it, they don't figure out who it was speaking to me.
God, that's so cool. And I didn't know that you spoke to those kids. So on a totally different note, what type of movies did you watch? Another question from Powers K is, what type of movies did you watch as a kid, and where did the inspiration for more of the sort of supernatural aspects come from? It's a pretty hard juxtaposition, small town Texas and the supernatural.
Well, part of it was, you know, from the very jump, you know, my agent and I knew we were going to sell this as like Friday Night Lights meets Twin Peaks, because, you know, Twin Peaks was a huge influence on me. David Lynch, I probably watched David Lynch much younger than I should have. Like, I remember watching Twin Peaks when I was like 12, and like it really made a huge impact on me. No, you know, it was weird. My parents, like, they weren't super puritanical. Like, we were a pretty religious family, but we really loved like art and movies, like popular entertainment. So we would watch some pretty edgy stuff. And I remember, like, you know, back in the day when you could go to like a Hastings video store and like rent a movie, like you would sometimes find these things just completely stripped of context, and you have no idea what it is, what tradition it comes out of. It just has a cool cover, or what it's available, or you're broke and that's the only thing in the dollar bin. Like, you find all these weird things. So I saw a lot of really strange anime that way. Like Paprika is a really crazy anime, Perfect Blue. They're these very surrealist, very sexually complicated films that are still very, very entertaining. So yeah, I watched a lot of Japanese cinema. I watched a lot of French cinema. And then, you know, as a kid, we were always watching whatever the latest like thrillers and rom-coms were. So, you know, I think that there's real education to be found even if the film doesn't amount to much. You can still learn so much when you're a young artist, just in like how they string a plot together.
Got it. Totally. Okay, on another sort of separate note, we want to know, what is it like to be launching the book digitally? And this is a question I actually really want to know the answer to also, is are you planning on celebrating tomorrow? Like, what does the day look like for John Fram launching their debut novel in quarantine?
You know, part of it is I'm sure there's going to be a lot of Instagram, which is very nice. I know a lot of Bookstagrammers have reviews lined up, which I'm super excited about and I'm very grateful for. Yeah, and I also like, I mean, I'm working on my next book already, so, like really far along. So I'm going to be doing that in the morning, like I always do. You know, it's something where I think that what I'm hoping to do is engage with people who have read the book or are reading the book like tonight. And then I have a friend with a ton of outdoor space in the city, which is a rarity. I'm going over to his place and we're going to do like a little socially distanced barbecue situation. Just a nice little responsible get together, probably in like the afternoon or evening, and then come home and go to bed. It's like, it's a weird process to be launching a book now. And I really think that, I think it's weird I think there's a danger of falling too much into the trap of putting a ton of significance on one day. Because I think if quarantine has taught us anything, it's that time is this sort of mushy substance that doesn't exist. So I'm not super invested in the day of. I'm just hoping over the next like 2 weeks, because I have like other events and stuff coming up, and other just like, you know, as people keep reading the book and readers connecting with the book, I'm just hoping to sort of cultivate that and nudge that along and enjoy it.
Got it. Again, beautifully said. Another question here is, rumor has it that you've been called Stephen Queen. How do you feel about that? Are you pleased with this title?
Yeah, I mean, you really can't be offended when somebody says something like that. I mean, it's so strange. Again, this is just one of those weird things that happen. We were in a marketing meeting. Ross and my agent and I were in a marketing meeting with a bunch of HarperCollins people, many of whom are here. Hello. And, you know, we just kind of like, somebody just mentioned like, do we want to position, you know, John as like the gay Stephen King? And my agent was like, oh my God, Stephen Queen. And it just like stuck in my head. I was like, oh, that's brilliant branding. We love it. And then I forgot about it for like months. And then I was doing an Instagram live with Scared Straight Reads, who we mentioned earlier. And we were both we had been drinking for a long time in that live. And by the time we got to like the last 15 minutes.
I was in that live and I can concur that that's true.
that live was fun. Oh my God. I mean, I'm amazed I didn't get canceled, but it was a fun time. We're chatting. And then Dennis was like, oh yeah, like, do you want to be like the next Stephen King? And I was just like, oh, Stephen Queen. La ha ha. We laughed about it. 3 months later, Library Journal had apparently been watching that, like the print magazine, and then they published a review where they were like, John Fram describes himself as Stephen Queen, but he deserves to be read on his own merits. And I was like, oh my, it was that, okay, maybe that was the weirdest moment of my life, because that was bizarre. When you're like, wow, somebody was either watching that recording or like picked it up later and watched it. Like, it was nuts. So now it's just kind of stuck, like it's in print. You know, I'm super flattered. I don't really know what it means, but it's very flattering.
I think it's really, really glam. We have another question that I'm trying to identify with, but I can't, but I'm gonna ask you. This question is from Nick, who says, John, how did your feelings about football change while writing this book?
Oh, that's a really good question. I really didn't like football growing up, but I think a lot of that was sort of a fear of it, and like a sort of a fear of, I think when you're a little queer boy who's not super athletic, football is very scary because it's very violent, it's very aggressive, and it's also very mainstream. And I think that when you're a gay kid, you know subconsciously that no matter how much you pretend, you're never going to really fit into that crowd. And so there was always this, I think that subconsciously I never wanted to be involved in anything resembling the mainstream because I was always afraid I'd be like found out. So I was very creeped out by football and also way more turned on by it than I wanted to admit because it's really hot and like the boys are like laying on top of each other, and it was just really confusing. So as a kid, I like was a snob and I avoided it and I hated it. Then when I got to be 25, and I was thinking about Texas and really sort of drawing up plans for the book, I was like, okay, I really need to go back and like figure out the rules of football because I had never actually understood the rules, like how football is played. So I was like, let me go back, let me really dive in and invest myself in this. So then once I got hooked on it and like really studied the game and really understood what was going on, I got invested in watching the game. But then the thing that's weird about Friday Night Lights, the book that like started the whole like pop culture phenomenon, the book is incredibly critical of football. It's very, very critical of the way that football really uses up young men, and in a way that, because it's a very violent sport, the injury rate is super high and the health complications of it for years go, like it can really affect boys for a very long time, not just through brain damage, which we all know about, but through shoulder and knee and just whole body wear and tear. So I knew that was a great theme for my book, because very much, it's a very violent book. And I was like, oh, this is great. I can just like pepper the book with all these gross details. But then I was like, even as I found myself enjoying watching high school football, I just became incredibly angry and saddened by it, because I was like, we are allowing these boys to be really famous and really cool. And when they get to like state finals, they get to be on ESPN and all this crazy stuff. And then like most of these boys are very poor and they're not going to go anywhere and they're not going to go pro. And this is like going to be the highlight of their life is at 18. And I just could not think of anything sadder, especially because they're only getting that attention because their town wants them to be something special. And that has a horrible consequence on them. So, I had this like peak and valley thing with like football, because I always was like snooty about it, and then I got really invested in it, and then the more I knew about it, the more disturbed I was by it.
Wow, that's so interesting. And I went to high school in the city, and we had zero.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's so interesting. Another question just came in that I'm obsessed with. This is a question that I wish people asked me more, and now I'm going to ask everyone else ever. Thomas asks, what did you learn while writing the book, maybe too late to affect the final draft, that you're excited to carry forward into the next project?
Oh my God. This is going to sound really weird since I wrote a book that's like 500 pages. Like it's this really chunky book, but I did learn less is more for sure. And I kind of, there is a lot of restraint in the Brightlands. Like, I mean, the first draft of the book was super long and we scaled it back a lot, but I've learned sort of in the process of like the last round of editorial notes with John Glenn and Peter Joseph, my amazing editors, that you just don't need, there's so much that can go, and the reader is really smart and they can track what you're doing. So it's been really refreshing to go into fresh projects and know like, oh wow, I don't need to set up these like 2 pages to get people into this building and tell you what it looks like. Like if you know what you're doing, you can get that in the reader's head really quickly, and just trust in your talent and trust in your storyteller's ability to create a scene and keep it moving. So that's been really exciting. And, it probably could have saved me about 6 months of hard work on the first draft of the Brightlands. But yeah, it's really nice to have going forward.
That's great. And our mutual friend, Eitan, the sleepy librarian, who's
oh, hey, boo.
Who's a great guy and a really, really fun account to follow, asked, what books are you currently reading?
What books am I currently reading? I am really I'm having a Sarah Waters kick right now. She wrote The Little Stranger, which is this really great ghost story set in like post-World War II England, where this sort of fading country house, it's using like the storyline of a haunted house story to examine like the way that England sort of dissolved after World War II and the way that capitalism and the old ways sort of fell apart, and certain people sort of fetishized the class system in this really scary way. That's really great. And then I just got what's it called, Washington Black, which I've been wanting to read for forever. And then I also recently was rereading Christopher Bolland's A Beautiful Crime, which is this really great, really glam, gay caper in Venice that is just so chic and so luscious and really compelling, and it just really sneaks up on you. I love that book so much.
Stunning. So this is going to be our second to last question. Is you mentioned that you're going to write the way you always do tomorrow. So when you say the way you always do it, do you have like a ritual that what does your morning look like? What time does your morning start? Is there coffee involved, etc.?
Yes. Yes. 6 a.m. every day. It used to be 5. I'm very grateful that the Brightlands, has sort of bought me some time. Basically, I'm able to, I work a lot less in my day job. So I'm able to wake up at 6 every day. And then it's a shower, coffee, 10 to 15 minutes of meditation on the Headspace app to really kind of just sort of calm my brain down and be, cautiously excited for whatever the work is going to bring. And then on a day when I'm writing all day, it's 6:30 to about 10 or 10:30. And then I'll have breakfast. And then I might take a run through, I live near Central Park, which is amazing. So I might take a run through Central Park, or I might go and read there for a while and take like a long walk. I try to be out of the house for about an hour and then come back, write a little bit more, have lunch. And then I typically will write in like 2-hour blocks for the rest of the afternoon until about 5 or 6. And then I clock out. But I treat it like a job.
That's great. That's really exciting. Okay, and the last question is, sorry, I have it right here. 1 second. What are you most, right now, in this moment, on the eve of your debut novel, what are you most grateful for?
Oh, that's a great question. Oh, wow. That's going to make me like emotional. I think just like, I'm incredibly grateful that whether it's like God or the universe or Kismet or whatever it is that got me here, like so many pieces align where so many pieces have aligned in a way that you can't predict. Like publishing every book is such an act of luck and faith that, it's like I signed with my agent like almost 10 years ago. The fact that he made it through his career until all of this time to then, and has been building a career. And then the fact that all these editors and all these publicists and all these bloggers and all these people have been working in their life and building up a career so that I am in this really incredible position where you have a story that you bring to people. And I'm not saying like I'm the center of everybody's universe, but that your story kind of sockets into all of those lives and the timing works out in all these different ways. Because I remember I was hoping to be a spring release and then COVID hit, and I was hoping to be like a June Pride release and the world caught on fire, which it needed to do, but it would have been very hard, even harder to launch a book then. And it's like all of those pieces have aligned to this week, where by no means is the world better or fixed, but there's a little bit of oxygen where I feel like I can be excited with a few people about it in a way that I could never have predicted and never planned, and I'm just infinitely grateful for. So I would just say that weird sort of like domino effect is incredibly humbling, and it has taught me so much about gratitude and expectations.
Got it. We got one last question in at the last minute, so I'm going to ask you that because we have the time. Is how do you organize your bookshelf?
How do I organize my bookshelf? Well, you get 25 copies of your book, so I had to put them somewhere. So they're kind of just like sitting on top there. No, I do not have a well-organized shelf. I really should. I mean, I have books everywhere. Every horizontal surface of my apartment has books. I think that in one of these days I'm going to get like my like permanent apartment or house or whatever, and I'll figure out a system then. But for now, I'm just really vibing with this kind of chaos, because it means it's always fun to sort of throw a bunch of books together, and then you find really interesting patterns when you put different people together.
Okay, John, this was such a pleasure. I'm so honored and so grateful to have been able to be a part of this moment.
Thank you so much for doing this. This was amazing. I can't thank you enough.
John, do you have any like thank yous or hellos or anything you want to send out before we wrap up tonight?
Oh my God. Okay. It's like when you like win an Oscar. No, seriously, I really should have. Jesus. So Ross Harris, first and foremost, this book was like the germination was like in his office. So I can never thank him enough for that. He was very patient with me for a long time. Peter Joseph and John Glenn at Hanover Square. Emir Flounders, Roxanne Jones, Grace Towery, Eden Church, all these publicity people. Margaret Marbury at Harlequin has been amazing. And then, if I forgot anyone at Harper, I'm so sorry. And then, Lynette Kim Library, Harlequin Library is amazing. And then, all the book streamers, all the bloggers, all the really kind interviewers, y'all have just been amazing. It's, the Bright Lance, it's here. We did it.
It's here.
And
for anyone, if you don't have a copy yet, I just put the link in our chat again. So hop through there and you can buy it through Strand. We're going to try to arrange to get some stock signed. We'll let you know later, like on Twitter and Instagram, if that is possible. Masks on, sign things. But thank you both so much for being here. It's been really wonderful talking with you and hearing more about Brightlands.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming in. This was amazing.
Thank you so much.
Have a good night.
All my love.
All my love. Bye.